puede detenerse. Tus sueños no. Elige bien. Elige UPB.
Well, good morning to all of the audience in Colombia and Latin America, and of course, good afternoon to our audience in Germany and Europe. Let me introduce myself. I'm Oscar Acevedo, professor at the Language Center at the Universidad Pontificia Bolivariana, and today I will be guiding the event as moderator. Welcome to the second part of HEPCOPA lecture series, a project organized by the Universidad Pontificia Bolivariana Bucaramanga and the University of Potsdam as part of the Higher Education Potsdam Colombia Partnership. The HEPCOPA project is a bilateral initiative developed jointly by Colombia and Germany, in which the University of Potsdam, Universidad de Caldas, Pontificia Universidad Javeriana de Cali, Colombian Universities Association, ASCUN, and Universidad Pontificia Bolivariana Bucaramanga have worked together since 2018 to build up capacities in the areas of quality, digitalization, and management in higher education. Today, we're going to talk about social and biological impact on human growth, a trend that is closely related to societal transformation. Before the start of the lecture, I want to give you to the virtual course, to invite you to the virtual course, Societal Transformation Process. The HEPCOPA lecture series will give a participation certificate to the audience that completes at least 80% of the activities that will be posted on the platform. If you want to complete your registration in the course, please click on the link that is fixed on the top of the YouTube chat. Now, we will be starting with the talk, so let me introduce you to our speaker for this lecture, PD Dr. Christian Scheffler. She is a human biologist at the University of Potsdam in Germany. Her research focus is human body growth, development, and body measurement under different and changing environmental conditions. She will expand these aspects and add recent anthropometric and social data obtained in unstunted Indonesian and Indian school children. She will summarize the impact of social, economic, political, and emotional factors on child growth and development. And in the light of these factors, conjointly discuss with the students modern health intervention. So with no other further presentation, Dr. Scheffler, let me welcome you to the HEPCOPA lecture series. It's our pleasure to have you here with us.
For the nice introduction, and I will be happy to speak here in the lecture series. And I think the talk should help to see the common global nutrition policy is more critical than it is always presented. So I will speak a little bit about my research due to the more or less common acknowledgement of nutrition and the impact of human growth. And human growth is mostly presented in body height and body weight. That's what everybody knows. And you know it also, if you are taller, then you are better grow, and if you're a smaller one, you are a small child, and so on. And or you remember maybe that your mom said eat, otherwise you will do not grow. That's what moms and grandmoms always talk. That leads us to the questions: did the taller people eat better? Did they have had a better nutritional situation during childhood? And did nutrition affected body height? That means, are the taller ones the better nourished ones? At first, some data of you, the Colombians, and of the German ones. The German today are in the mean in males 180 centimeters and the females 166 centimeters. But more than 100 years ago, in the 19th century, they were smaller. The males are 168 centimeters around and the females 156. The Colombians today are a little bit between. There are 176 centimeters in males and 159 centimeters in females. And what we see here in the curve is a growth between 5 and 18-year-old boys and girls of Colombia between 1973 and 2018. The green line, the highest line here, is always the HWO reference. That means so every child should grow. What you see is that the Colombian children are below the green line. But you can also see that they are today, or a few years ago, taller than in the 1973s as boy and as a girl. And this increase in body height is observed all over the world. It is observed here in the Colombians. It's also observed in the Germany. That we named secular trend, and it means increase in body height from generation to generation. We have more detailed data for the reference group of Colombian boys and girls. You see that's the normal way to present the data. The mean, it's more or less that, and plus and minus 3 standard deviation of that line. And what you see also is a comparable data set between the Colombian data. These are the smooth line, and the dotted line, it's the HWO. And what you can also see is that up to an age of 14 in boys and up to an age of 11.6 or whatever in girls, the HWO curve and the Colombian curve are more or less fitted, and after puberty, it is a gap. Then the reference curve of the HWO is really higher than the Colombian ones. So at the end, the Colombians are smaller than the HWO presented. The question comes from here, are they not so well nourished like the other ones? But if you have a sign of nutritional situation, normally the BMI were used. If you are hungry and if you are not able to eat something, then you are small and slim. And if you have a better nutritional situation, you are more fatter or more normal or whatever. And what you see here is again, the smooth line is a line from the Colombians and the dotted line is the HWO reference. And you see that the Colombian people are not malnourished comparable to the Colombians, but they are at the end smaller than the HWO. So the question is again, nutrition influences body height, and the common knowledge is, oh, it's a old fairy tale, nobody knows. Good nutrition allows children to grow, develop, learn, play, participate, and contribute, while malnutrition robs children of their future, leaves young lives hanging in the balance. Stunting, that's a new term, I will introduce this later on, is a devastating result of poor nutrition in early childhood. Children suffering from stunting may never grow to their full height, and their brains may never develop to their full cognitive potential. Nutrition influences height. Stunted children are malnourished. Or clean your plate. But what means stunting? Stunting and undernutrition are normally synonymally used in the international scientific literature. But stunting themselves is only a statistic value. Stunting means height of height for age, that's a normalization statistical way, of -2 standard deviation score below the reference. Normally the HWO reference is mentioned. That means a stunted child is -2 standard deviation scores below the reference. It's small, nothing else. On the other way around, linear growth failure in childhood is the most prevalent form of undernutrition globally. That means inconsequent, stunted, that means too small compared to the reference, children are unhealthy. Is that true? The contradictory paradigm is that 150 centimeters is the default stature for males. So in this balance, we have to find out what is the most important influence on height and what leads to stunting or leads to the normal height if the HWO height is a normal one. Sorry. Here we have a trip to the 19th century in Germany. And what you see here is that in the 19th century, the children, the adults as well, are smaller than today. And these children comes from that population, they belong to that population, they're really small, smaller than the Colombians today, at the beginning of the 19th century. But look to these children. These children are so-called stunted. but are they unhealthy? Are they undernourished? Not. Now we jump to the Indonesians today. The Indonesians as an adult today are 160 centimeters in males and 155 centimeters in females. That's more or less the same like the Germans' height in the 19th century. Look to these children. Are they unhealthy? No, they are small and thin. And if you have the concrete data of that group, we want to detect how the nutritional situation of a human body has an influence on body height. And for that, we can use a BMI. The BMI explained in the further data for Colombian data, but also the skin fold thickness. And if you have a higher subcutaneous fat layer, then you are more well nourished than people with lower subcutaneous fat layer. And what we see here is a mean of the subscapular and the triceps skin fold thickness. And you see it's from 0 to 40, from 0 to 40, from 0 to 40 in 3 different groups of Indonesia. Oh, here's a mistake. The rule have to be there. It's a mistake in the presentation here. Sorry. These are the urban children from Ubud. This is an island. It's on an island Bali. It's a touristic island. These people are well-being people. These data come from Kupang. Kupang is the capital of West Timor. It's an urban one. And this is Zoe. It's a rural one that comes to here. It's 100 kilometers far away from the capital. And these children are the poorest one, and these are the richest one. And you see that in every child we find, or in every subgroup, we find thin children and not so thin children, and not so thin children, and not so thin children. But we find thin children with low height SDS, low body height, and taller ones, low and taller, low and taller. The red line is the HWO. That means the Ubud children are more or less in the range of the HWO. The Kupang are below, and the Zoe children are in the mean stunted. But we have here a stunted population, but not a malnourished population, and no relevant association between nutrition and body height. Now we have another data set from German children. What we see here is a correlation plot. And if you are not involved in that plot, I give a short introduction. The darker the color, the stronger the association. And the blue one is positive association or positive correlation. And the red one is negative correlation. And we have here a data set of 3 to 6-year-old German children. We know from the nutritional components, we asked what have they ate in the last 24 hours. And compare to the typical data of the tables and so on, and we see that we have no association between body height and calorie input. We have no association between protein intake, between carbohydrate intake, between fat intake, between vitamin and so on. No association of nutrition to body height. The same structure of the picture is here, but we have a complete other data set. We have the data of Ethiopia, and this data come a big study, the so-called Young Life study. This is a longitudinal study in 4 different countries, in Ethiopia, Peru, Vietnam, and also India, and they ask also for the nutritional impact. And we skipped out of the data set the Ethiopian children at an age of 5 and these children at an age of 12. And you see height has no influence or is no associated between protein, fat, carbohydrates, vegetable sweets, and so on. So we have again the result that nutrition has no influence on body height. Now we have a deeper look in this data set. We have more age cohorts. We have the 5-year-olds, the 8-year-olds, the 12-year-olds, the 15-year-old, and 19-year-old Ethiopian children and adolescents, and have from every child the data of the fat impact and the nutritional situation and the height. But what you see is if the higher impact of height has no influence, or fat has no influence on height, and the same in the proteins, the same association with carbohydrates. So we didn't find any association of nutritional impact on body height. Then we have a look to physical fitness. If you have a good nutritional situation, you are more physical fit. If you are undernourished and if you have starvation times, then you are no physical fit, then you are no able to jump very well in such situations. And you have again the same data set, the Ubud data of the island of Bali in Indonesia and the Kupang and the Zoe data of the Isle of West Timor. We know these are the well-being people, these are in the middle, and these are the lowest. And what we see is the blue line, and the blue line is a sign of the length of jump. We measured how long the children jump. And we see that we have the best results in the Zoe children, the children with the lowest social background. The richest people, the well-being people, jump not so far. But we didn't have any association between height and jump and weight and jump. So no association between body height and weight and physical fitness within the group. The conclusion for that data set is that nutrition has no influence on body height. Look to the children of Indonesia. They are not malnourished. They are healthy and happy children with a high level of physical fitness, but they are mostly slim and they are short. What they need is medical screening and preventions. We observed more than 1,600 children in 1 year, and 2 years before also again 2,000 children. And what we saw was only that 3 or 4 children wear glasses. We cannot assume that they can look better than the rest of the world. So there are a lot of children that need it, and you see it here. These children need, of course, glasses. That is a medical problem, it's a self-confidence and so on. It's not a nutritional problem. So now we go more or less to the theoretical point of view. The traditional perspective of growth regulation is that you have a gene. In the genes, you have the information about the phylogenetical impact, that you are a human. Then you have the typical influence of the parental genes and all these hereditary things. And this leads that you get a target and body height. This target is genetic determined. That was more or less the knowledge the last years up to the last 100 years. And we have a variation, and this variation means that we have a relatively minor input of ecology that included also the nutritional situation, about the family impact, maybe the social one, and the SEPE. SEPE is a term that was introduced by Barry Bogan. It's the most important human biologist today, and she has had a lot of data measured in Guatemala. And she mentioned that social, economic, political, emotional impact had an input on human growth. But in the traditional perspective, this impact is very low. Now we will go to another perspective. The question is again, what are the determinants of adult body height? The classic interpretation is the same that I showed in the last slide, that the mean depends on the average living condition and the target is the individual height maximum. That is influenced by genetics, of course. If you have tall parents, then you are taller than the other one. It's also influence on nutrition. Eat what is on your plate again, and on health and hygienic situation. That's a traditional interpretation. That leads to a good socioeconomic circumstances, and good socioeconomic circumstances have the idea that you have a higher social strata, that you have a better career, that you have a better choice of partner, and that leads the genes are changing and so on and so on, and then the people is going up. That's the idea of secular trend earlier. But we will go to these different questions. Nutrition we discussed. Okay, now we find other ways. Genetic. In the old literature, you found that genetic has an influence on body height more than 80%. But today we know that it is smaller than assumed. We have different genetic studies that show that the influence of variance of body height is more or less between 12 and at least 45%. Depends on the methods. The 35% comes from the statistical imputation. The really biological data show that we have only an impact on variance of body height of 12 up to 25%. Look here, you have data of European people measured at the end of the 19th century. The Scottish men are at that time the tallest ones. They are in the middle, 177 centimeters, and the Dutch people, they are at that time between 163 centimeters. Today, the people from Netherlands are the tallest people worldwide. They have a mean of height, an average height of 184 centimeters. For the Scottish people, I don't have any separated data, but the people in UK have more or less the same data like the Scottish people 100 years ago or 120 years ago. But think to the generation change in humans. One generation takes time from 20 to 25, in the modern countries 30 years. And if you have any idea how fast and genetic pool can changing in a population, then you are aware that the increase of height about 120 years, about 20 centimeters in the Dutch and Netherlands is not predicted by a change in genes. Look again, some examples here are children. They are wanted with a family migrate to the US at the end of the 19th centuries to have a better hope of life, to better living conditions and so on. But look to these children. Are they malnourished? Not. They are not happy, but they have enough to eat. And also these people, these are the really rich senators in Hamburg at the end of the 19th century. They are fat, they are healthy, and they are wealthy, but they are really short comparable to today. And these are really rich people, richer than the rich people today sometimes. And we can assume that the Scots are not better fed than other European populations at the time. That leads us to this question, is this interpretation true? Or have we a new interpretation? To find out if we have a new interpretation, we have to jump in deeper in the statistics of human body height. We know from every data set that body height in a population is always normal distributed. And we know also that in adults, the standard deviation in a population is always plus minus 6 centimeters. And now an example of height of Swiss conscripts. They are in the end of the 19th century taller than today, of course, but they have a normal distribution and the standard deviation is the same. The second example comes from Barry Bogan. These are the height of Maya. They live in Guatemala. These are the smallest people. And we see the Maya in Guatemala are smaller than the Maya in Florida or in Los Angeles, in US, but they have the same standard deviation score. And also old statistic data from historic conscripts, they have normal distribution and they have the same standard deviation score. This statistical identity we called community effect. That means people whose places of residence are close to each other are similar in height. And the community effect in body height describes the effect of social interaction within a group on the growth and body height of its members. That comes to another science on humans that comes more or less to the social and psychological literature. And in that literature, we know that it is introduced a social identity theory of intergroup behavior. This theory considered social identity as that portion of an individual self-concept that is derived from the perceived membership in a relevant social group. That means also that group identification and identity signaling facilitate in-group favoritism and out-group derogation and shape common goals and social norms, that every school child is aware of that. Those who feel similar are also similar in height. look here. These should present some populations. And there are standard deviations. The population is always the same. And we have tall populations and small populations. And the distance in height is higher if the geographical distance is far away. That means the neighbors are more or less at the same height. Maybe you are here and the Netherlands are here. You are far away in the distance, and so we don't meet each other, and so the community that you belongs to is a smaller one and the Netherlands belongs to another community. But that's not only the geographical distance, that's also the social and the emotional distance in a population. The question is again, why do different communities or societies or social strata differ so much in height? And we know also from the human biological point of view on the human behavior that children recognize cues that predict dominance. If a child sees a man or a woman that gives signs of dominance, they accepted this dominance. They also recognize physical size as social signals and transmit it to social hierarchies. And that's an important point. And groups of children from dominant background, if maybe the children of the president or the children of the head of the farm or the children of a professor, are educated both formally and by social experience to anticipate future dominance. Because in strict hierarchic communities, people from the high social strata will be in future also in the high social strata. If there are no social mobility is possible in that hierarchic structures. And we are all with mammals and stature signal status. That's in all mammals the same. Here we have a data set. It's more or less 200 or 300 years ago from Germany. These are children from a boarding school, from different social strata in the same boarding school. And the typical thing of such boarding school at that time was that they only went at home on Easter and on Christmas. The other time they are lived together, and at that time it was not so comfortable like today. They have big sleeping halls. That means if one child is infected by any illness, today we have Corona, of course, then the neighbor has the same, is sick, and the other neighbor is also sick, and so on and so on. So they have all the same infections. They have always ate the same. We know it from the description of the nutritional situation, and they have all the same teachers. So they have complete same living conditions. But the people from the high hierarchy know that at the end of the school, they will enter in the hierarchy, they are belonging to the high social class, and the other ones realize that they can do what they want. They will be in future always in the lower social strata. The same we found also is in the Indonesian data set. We ask for mothers' education, 6 year, 9 year, 12 year, or 14 years, and we bring together this data with the height of the Indonesian boys and the Indonesian girls, and you see that the higher the education level of the mother, that the taller the children are. The red line is the line from the from girls, from mothers, they have a high education. The other ones are below, also in boys. And that is another interesting example. Here we have Vietnamese migrants in Germany. These migrants grow up here, they live up in Germany because the parents are the migrants and the children grow up here. And these are taller today than the parents. They are more or less in males 7 centimeters taller than the father is, and in females 4 centimeters taller than the mother is. And we asked the children, the young adults, to a lot of things and detected which parameters have an influence on height. And we find out that only mothers and fathers' education have an influence on height. Also the wish at 13 We asked the young adults, what was your wish of body height as you were 13 years old? And the question of the height of the best friend. And the surprising thing was that the wish at 13 was more or less the same like the young adults in Germany are. It's more or less the same data. And then we calculated out these 4 influencing factors with a linear model, the significance. And the mother's height was not significant, and also father's height is not so high significant like the other ones. That means the genes are out. So we have only an important influence of the height of the young adults, how they wanted to be as an adult height at 13 years old, and the height of the best friend. If the best friend is a taller one, then you are taller. If the best friend is smaller one, you are small. So then we have it more or less in the population level in Japanese. These are the data of the birth cohort. They're born in 1880 up to 1980. And we have the same in secular trend like we have observed in the Colombian data at the beginning and also in the German data. The people today are taller than the people 180 years before, 100 years before. And we have again the difference between males and females. The males are the taller one, the females are the smaller one. But we have an interesting result. These are the students. And at that time, up to the middle of the century, there are no democracy in Japan. And the students are always in the higher social strata. So they are taller than the conscript. The data of the normal population of females is missing because they have no data of conscripts. But after the end of 10 years after the World War II, where the adults, the young adults of the lower social strata, more or less at the same height like the higher social strata. And in Japan, this time was really hard influenced by malnutrition, and there's the atom bomb, and there's a really bad situations. But after opening the society, after the social mobility, we have the strategic growth adjustment of the adolescents, like the Vietnamese people they have had. Look here, that's more or less summarizing the situation. We know that stature signals a status. We have the dominant population and the subdominant population. This is in all feudal societies, or more or less adaptation to that point of view. And the higher group, the group of the high social strata are the taller ones, and the group of the low social strata are the lower ones. But then it could be that the lower ones get a hope for better life due to social mobility, education, democracy, revolution, migration. They have a better self-confidence, and then they have the chance to come in a better living position. They have the chance to come to a better social strata in the community, and then they reached a better height, and they realized at an adolescent they would have a better life. Some people can jump another way around, that's also possible, but most of them are growing up. But the people here are threatened. They feel that they wanted to be in that situation, and so we have in a so democratic society, again, different living, different height due to social strata, but not so strong. The distance is not so far away, because we have, during adolescence, a strategic growth adjustment. So bring it back to our beginning, we can say that the new interpretation is that the mean is adaptive within a wide genetic frame. Our frame is maybe up to 150 and 195, and in that you can regulate your height, but you regulate it due to the community, and you find out in the community the relative optimum. That means genetics, nutrition, and health and genetics are only biological requirements. If you don't have anything to eat, you don't go. But if you have a small time anything to eat, we know from people that you can catch up your growth. After the really starvation time in World War I in Germany, of the malnourished people, they are smaller than assumed. They have had a catch-up group due to nutritional interventions up to 3.5 centimeters in 6 to 8 weeks. That's enormous. You have a grow in the middle up to 3.5 centimeters in 6 weeks after refeeding. So these biological requirements are in most populations away. So we have a community effect, and we have the strategic goals adjustment, and we know from Meerkat that it's a zoological based thing. We know from a Meerkat study this hierarchic situation in the small mammals that you fed the subordinate one, they get fatter, and then the old dominant animal realized that the position will be maybe in a competition, and then the dominant one grow up without any additional nutrition. That's what we see also in Germans in a smaller way, but the idea behind is the same. Now come back to our first question, or our point, starting point, global nutrition policies. Which factors really influence body height? To what extent does nutrition play a role? And now we know body height is influenced by the body height of the community, the possibility of social mobility, or shorter, hope for a better life. That is in line with the possibility of better education and the higher self-confidence. And only long-time malnutrition during childhood has a negative effect on body height. If no catch-up growth is possible, that means the children of the poor migration camps in Yemen or whatever, they don't have anything to feed. And if they stay more than 10 or 15 life during childhood there, then they have no possibility to catch up growth. But short malnutrition is not seen in the body height at the end. Now it's so that global nutrition policies to improve malnutrition are only measured on height, but it should not be measured on body height. Too small body height means stunting. Malnutrition is a global problem, of course, and it is increased temporarily during wars and natural disasters. And if it's a short time, then you can answer with a catch-up growth. It's too long, then you are smaller than assumed. These problems can increase with climate change, of course, because we have another nutritional situation in the future, maybe. And they can also increase during Corona pandemic situation. But the nutritional intervention is only necessary if there are typical medical signs of undernutrition. That means if you have typical infections, other signs. Most short people, that called stunting, have no typical medical signs of undernutrition. So stunting is not a synonym of malnutrition. Stunting is a synonym of social disadvantage and poor parental education. And if you wanted to bring the children in the better height due to the HWO reference, you have to educate them better, you have to give them participation in social life, they have to give them conditions for better self-confidence, and they have to have a hope for a better life. So the new perspective of growth regulation is that ZEPE has a more higher influence than in the traditional perspective. Of course, we have our genes. These genes make us as humans. And we have also a maternal and a paternal biocultural history that can also influence genes, maybe due to epigenetics and whatever. But if you grow up, you grow up in a lens of biocultural plasticity. And this lens depends on the ecology that you have, of the family input, and on ZEPE. And the ZEPE concept means that the social, economic, political, and emotional influence is more important than before. And in this concept, we can conclude the idea about community effect the knowledge that status signals status, and the idea of statistic was adjustment. And then you grow up in a wide phenotypic frame due to your own biocultural influence. Thank you. Are there any questions? Are there any comments? Hello?
All right. Well, first of all, Dr. Schaefer, thank you very much for this talk. Thank you very much for this interesting presentation. Now we're going to open the space for any questions or any doubts or comments that our audience would like to address to Dr. Schaefer. And well, in the meantime, on my part, let me tell you that it was a very interesting presentation. It's very thoughtful to know how this how can we call it, this popular knowledge, this proverbial knowledge that we have, that you are what you eat, is not always so correct, right? There are a lot of other factors playing into this matter. And yes, we are social beings above all.
Yeah,
So
social.
it is,
That's it.
yes, so it is quite interesting to know that it's not only on our social relationships and our development, but also on a biological and physiological aspects that these things such as body height and body weight can be influenced on. So thank you very much for the presentation. I don't know if there are any questions from the part of the audience or any other comments, any doubts that we have still. Let's see here on the chat. Well, our audience is mostly thanking you, Dr. Schaefer, for this interesting presentation as I was doing. And yes, they really, really, oh, okay, we have one question here. George Hafer says, first of all, thank you. And the second part, or his second intervention, is that if there is a different narrative about wealth, if there is any part or any factor that wealth may be playing a part on this.
Wealth per se is sometimes associated with better nutritional situation, but not always. We know from that wealth is more or less in relation to the other ones. Look to the people at the end of the 19th century in Germany. They are wealthy, especially the senators in Hamburg, or maybe some German people know again the Buddenbrook from Thomas Mann. And these people are very wealthy, but they are shorter than today. And so wealthiness is always in association to the community as well. The wealthy people in a hierarchic population is taller than the other ones, but not taller than the other population.
All right. Okay. I don't know for Mr. Hafer if that quite answered the question. We have some other questions here. So how do developing countries, or how can developing countries receive support from international institutions in order to promote policies, or in order to establish like a work plan? And of course, if it is possible to do so. Let me check again. Yes. So how would be the intervention of the international institutions, or if there is any possibility to have intervention from international institutions in order to affect or to change this phenomena that you are presenting us today?
The problem is that I think it's a big political frame of that. If you measured malnutrition, or if you measured stunting or too small for the reference, and say it's only a nutritional problem, then it's really easy to give some nutritional nutrients to this population.
Mhm.
But the thing, what we see is there are a lot of studies of that the impact of this nutritional intervention is not so high that we assume. We can assume the same like after World War I in Germany. But what we see in the nutritional intervention programs, if it's a normal situation in the community, not disaster of war and so on, then we can only observe more 0.2 or whatever millimeters in increase. That's nothing. And my personal point of view is that it is easier to give some people something to eat than give them better education. And I'm not really sure if every country that is affected by stunting or the government of this one are really interested in better educated people. That's a more strange situation about that. But I think education or introduce education and introduce self-confidence, it's a long way. It's not so easy. And it's not the best comfortable situation maybe for dictators or whatever, because then the people are starting to think about everything. And then they realize maybe that this situation can be improved themselves, and that's more or less not the situation that they want to have.
All right. So yes, more than in short words or in few words, is more important to educate people better rather than just give them something to eat on.
And if we are looking to Germany, maybe the strongest secular trend we have had in the 20s of the 20th century, and in that time we don't have any good situation to live. There are poor regions at that time and so on, but we have some change in the social structure. So the lower social strata are aware that they could get a better position in the society because we have the first time democracy at that time. It failed due to the German history because then the Nazi time was starting. But after that, we have again a high secular trend, and this high secular trend is due to democracy. And in the democracy, you are able, if you get a better education, you are able to have social mobility.
Yes,
and
that is
so
totally
education helps to get a better job on the one side, and on the other side helps also to understand society. And so education and hope for and better living conditions, that's what we need for the people, that they go up. The contradictory question is it necessary that we are so tall? But then there's another question. But if the policies are measured the wealthy population on a height, then it's necessary to do that.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Schaefer. We have two more questions from our audience. First, Joshua Salcedo asks us or comments to us if it couldn't be also argued that modern food is also responsible for taller people. Well, given that modern food is more nutritious compared to the 19th century, and well, also taking into account the amount of food, the higher amount of food. That is what he was wondering here.
Yeah, but look to yourself. If you have a higher amount of food, you'll get fatty.
That's
but
true.
Yeah. Okay, that's a little bit too easy because we are finished with our growth. But we have, on the other side, the problem that people also in low and middle income countries have an immense problem of obesity due to the higher amount of food and due to the fast food and so on. So the calorie intake is really too much. I remember to the children in Indonesia, especially in the U-boat one, if you look for the skin foot sickness, they have 40 millimeters. That means such skin fold thickness as a child. That's enormous. And the normal ones have small ones. And they are not taller than the other ones. But we know that there are sometimes, but it's difficult to understand if you are not a human biologist. If you have a higher amount of food, you sometimes go up faster. Then comparable to the other ones, you can be a little bit taller, but then you are also faster in maturation, and then you stop earlier to reach your adult height. So at the end, you are not taller, but that's a time thing. I skip it out to the discussion here, but that could be sometimes an impact on childhood growth, but not on adulthood.
All right. Thank you very much for your answer, Dr. Schaefer. I hope it was clear for Mr. Salcedo. And well, one of our last interventions and questions for today, it comes from Diana Aristizabal. First of all, she wants to thank us very much for the presentation. Yeah, she says that, well, we never studied and knew about other conditions than nutrition, so it is interesting and helpful for her career. And well, finally, she would like to know if there are any effects that this pandemic may be causing on height from humans or from society in general.
That's a very interesting thing, and we try to start a study to do that. We don't get a response from the parents. We're thinking that especially for the youth after adolescence and so on, we have a really strange situation due to pandemic because they are stressful. They are without any association. They are skipped sometimes the holidays and the communication out of schools and so on, and they are very well stressed. And we know that stress has an impact on growth, especially psychological stress. And we assume that the children that are affected by stress due to chronic pandemic are smaller than they could be. We know it also from the endocrinological situation because we know that the human growth is influenced by insulin-like growth hormone factor. That's a factor that they go up, and if you have a higher value, then you are taller one, and if you lower one. And we know other side that the insulin-like growth hormone factor is negatively associated to the stress hormone. That means if you are stressed, you have a lower value of insulin-like growth hormone. And so we assume that they are stressed, and it could be also if they are sitting really a long time at home and have no contact to the other ones, that the community effect is going there. And I know from a study, also from it's a little bit another point of view of research from the Lithuanian people. The colleague always asks for self-estimation and self-confidence and due to the BMI and so on. And she realized that there's a change. The young people have no such a big problem with their BMI today in Lithuania, but they are more close to their own face, and that can completely agree with them, because if you speak always with a computer like we now, we see our own face and you see it comparable to the other ones, and then sometimes if the talk is boring or whatever, you compare your own face with the other ones, and then your self-confidence to the face is another one, then to the body composition in former time. In former time, the young females in Europe want to be slim and so on. And it's not so important now. So we have always here a change, but it's not the topic. It's another idea about. But we really assume that the corona will affect the body height, so it's not taller than before. Maybe the secular trend is stopped.
So somehow we should be expecting shorter people or smaller people in the future.
It could be. But the important thing is that it's not that they are shorter. The important thing why they are shorter. And they are not shorter because they don't have to eat, because they are shorter because to the psychological
socially relate
pandemic situation.
And because they don't socially relate, as you were mentioning throughout your presentation, pretty much.
Yes. I think that would have a big influence. But unfortunately, I can measure them because the studies field.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Schaefer, for this thorough answer. And well, I see here there are no further questions from the audience. So, Dr. Schaefer, let me thank you again for your time and for being part of this HEPCOPA lecture series. Thank you very much for having this conversation with us and with our audience. And it was a very fundamental lecture in order to understand how we humans work, biologically speaking. So thank you very much for everything.
Thank you.
All right. So let me thank all the people who were connected on our YouTube channel. Let me thank you for your attendance and for your interest on this lecture. We want to invite you next Wednesday, February 16th, to the lecture, A Comparison of the Practice of Online Arbitration in E-Commerce. It will be a lecture given by Dr. Santiago Duzan. And well, thank you very much to everybody. We will be seeing you soon. Have a really good day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shaver.